This episode of Fuel for the Soul is powered by ASICS. Head over to asics.com and sign up for a one ASICS account. It's completely free, and when you sign up, you'll receive 10% off your first purchase. You'll also gain access to exclusive colorways on asics.com, free standard shipping, special birthday month discounts, and more.
Hi, this is Thomas with Believe in the Run.
This is Megan with Believe in the Run.
And this is Megan with Featherstone Nutrition.
I can't believe I'm still doing this. This has been so long, but AKA Feathers.
And you're listening to Fuel for the Soul, the podcast where we chat all things hydration and nutrition and how it affects performance. And today we're going to talk about some studies that came out. We're going to answer some listener questions. And before we do all that fun stuff, we need to chat about our sponsor, Runway.
Runway! And I mean, they actually segue really nicely into the first thing we're going to talk about today, which we're just going to be a little bit like, I don't know, discreet because we want to excite you with our news here in a minute. But anyways,
Discreet.
I think it's very fun because you guys always keep us abreast of the newest things you're seeing. So a lot of the things we're going to talk about today was you guys being like, Megan, we need to know what you guys think about all this. So anyways, it's going to have to do with protein powder. So Runway also has a protein powder that we've been talking a lot about, and it segues very nicely into our convo here in a minute. But in case you just happen to be hearing about Runway's new complete protein product, it is a vegan protein powder available in chocolate and acai flavors. I think we each have our own favorites here.
What's weird is I did not think I would like the acai flavor.
What do you think?
I don't hate it. I don't hate it. I think it has its place. Like I would throw it in with, maybe that's more of your fruity banana thrown in there, smoothie kind of thing. But like when it comes down to me just wanting to get it down, get that protein, I'm a chocolate guy.
Yeah. I give you that. But yeah, it's got 25 grams. Oh gosh, sorry, I just hit my headphones with this. With the bag of protein, it's a hefty one. It's 25 grams of vegan protein from a fermented nutritional yeast and 5 grams of creatine in it. So a very unique product, nothing like it on the market, and we're all loving it.
Yeah, so, it's different than some other typical vegan proteins that are usually derived from like a pea or something like that. This one's very different, and it has higher leucine content, right? So, correct. Which is what we're looking for.
Yep. To really make sure we're recovering our muscles, as well as the standard, which would be like a whey protein powder, which not everyone can tolerate. That's like the standard for muscle recovery because it is so high in leucine. So this matches that and is just as good at recovering our muscles as quote unquote the gold standard. So it's a really great option.
I have a quick question about creatine while we're talking about
Hold on,
that.
wait. Let's get our ad out here and finish. So if you want to try it and haven't yet, go to rnw.life and use the code FEATHERS15 for 15% off your first order.
Can I ask?
Okay, now you can ask questions.
So I like the creatine that's in the protein powder, but I don't always use the protein powder. So I wanted to get some gummies that are creatine gummies, and you've probably seen all over Instagram now the ads for them. But I got one that says that it's made in an FDA approved factory, and
it's also NSF for sports certified.
Yeah, NSF perfect. For sports certified. So I was going to ask because like normally we talk about like supplements and whether or not you're really getting what they say. Do you think if the company has gone to that length, then they're probably have a good product?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can get the facility certified. But then the biggest thing we want is that the product is certified. So it sounds like they're covering all the bases with that cool. one in particular. Yeah. Good.
So just in case I make it to the Olympics this year, I'll be.
You will not be
good to go.
Positive for anything at least from your creatine. I don't know about the rest of your life, but
yeah.
Don't eat any burritos.
Yeah.
No pork.
Okay, so the first study we want to chat about here today, it came from a CNN article, and it was discussing heavy metals in our protein powders, which sounds kind of scary.
Exactly.
So talk to us about this.
Yeah. So I can't even count the number of you that slid into my DMs over the last week asking us to discuss this. So again, we appreciate knowing what's on all of your minds. And the more I hear from you guys, the more I'm like, yes, this is something that's out there we absolutely need to cover. So dug into that. So it was a study that was actually published by the Clean Label Project, which is a nonprofit whose mission is to, quote unquote, uncover the hidden risks of environmental contaminants and toxins lurking in our everyday products. So this is, as we said, a group of folks that have created this nonprofit, and they are the ones who actually did this study. So they tested protein powders, 160 protein powders. So I, really give them the high bar there of testing so many different ones. And what they tested for was heavy metals, so lead, cadmium, arsenic, and mercury, and then also BPA and BPS, which is often found like from plastics, right? We've heard of BPA-free bottles and things like that. So what they found was that 47% of the 160 protein powders that they tested exceeded the California Proposition 65 safety thresholds for toxic metals. So to take a step back, they are reporting, right, that 67% of protein powders are too high in these heavy metals and or BPA that they tested. So I think a really important thing to understand is the difference between this California Proposition 65 and then what is actually mandated as safe through our food supply, like government wide, right, or nationally. So there are different standards there. So this is coming back as a little more alarming because the standards for this Proposition 65 are very different than for other food standards. So, taking a step back and just looking at this, I think it's coming across as much more harsh or scary than it probably needs to, at least from my perspective there. So you guys have probably seen like a label, like actually Runway has it on their label on the back. It's like this little thing right here that says, consuming this product can expose you to lead, which is known in the state of California. So you guys have probably all seen that additional. So that's what they were actually looking at or flagging as having too much lead. So when I really dug into it, I was like, okay, what are we even talking about, right? So this Proposition 65 states something has to have less than 0.5 micrograms of lead, whereas USP, which would be a larger governing body over the entire United States for protein powders, says it can have 10 micrograms. So that's a huge difference, 0.5 versus 10. So that's kind of why so many more protein powders were tripped or flagged in this study that the Clean Label Project did.
So why are their standards so much more strict than the general nationwide standards?
So that's a good question. And I guess, to be honest, I'm not going to sit here and say like which one's right and which one's wrong.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a personal decision. Like, how concerned are you about your lead exposure? Have you been exposed in the past? Are you trying to minimize that? I think that's something for each of us to figure out for ourselves. But I think it's important to understand that's why this study looked so alarming, was because the definitions of how much lead is quote unquote okay, which we know if we could all consume none, that would be wonderful, right? But why is lead in our protein powder, I think, is the next good question. So lead's in our soil. So they found in this study that the most likely contaminated protein powders were plant-based and chocolate, because lead is often in cacao, and plant-based protein powders are picking up more of that from the soil than, say, whey from a cow, right? So it makes sense, right, that a lot of this might not be quote unquote intentional or a poor product. It could just be like where these particular products were grown, where they're sourcing their protein from, sourcing their chocolate from. It could just have, more lead in it. Like, I know you guys might remember there was a study recently that chocolate had more lead than it was supposed to. Same concept,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
So I feel like I remember hearing that we wanted to be eating like more plants that from soil because the soil is where the nutrients were, but you're saying
Can't
this
win.
is also where the lead lives.
Right. We can't
Okay.
win. No, you could. I mean, it's the same thing with research. You could pick anything apart. You can find something wrong with even the most, healthy possible thing in the world. But it was really interesting, right, to kind of dive into this a little bit more, understand why things were flagged a certain way. What does this look like? So I had a lot of people very concerned and very scared. Like, is my protein powder safe? What is the best ones? Which ones should I choose? So now that we understand a little bit about how this study went, it's like, okay, if you're concerned about this, like what do we do to kind of minimize our risk or try to find products that have lower amounts of lead, or like, what does this look like, especially if you're somebody who's using a plant-based protein powder. So of course I went down this rabbit hole, which I actually did have to dig pretty far for, but we often talk about certifications for supplements. So we know we have Informed for Sport, like the Informed Sport certification. And then we also have the NSF certification for sport. So both of those two things I kind of dove down to see, like, okay, do they test for lead, heavy metals, or is it just, we know they test for like the purity of the product to make sure that it actually has the amount of protein it states. We also know that these sport certifications make sure there's nothing banned in there so that Thomas doesn't test positive when he goes to the Olympics
When
next
I go
time.
for my Olympic trials.
Right? We got to make sure he's clean. But I was curious because I was like, I don't know, like, do they test for lead and things like that? So the Informed Sport does. And it also has an informed protein certification that you can get. And that will specifically test for lead and heavy metals. I actually did reach out to Runway too to see what they knew about it, because they are Informed Sport certified and Informed Protein certified. So they were able to let me know that yes, indeed, it does test for heavy metals. So because Runway goes above and beyond and pays that chunk of money to get certified, we can trust that that product is good, which is another reason why we sponsor, they're a sponsor of this, is because we do trust, the ethics behind their brand. And then also that NSF for Sport certification will test for heavy metals. So if you're concerned, what we need to do is just get on either of those websites and search to find out which protein powders are certified. So it's super easy. There's a really easy search function. The one website is sport.wetestYouTrust.com, and the other one is www.nsfsport.com. So those are the two places you could go and search for a protein powder that has been tested to make sure it doesn't have high levels of lead or other, heavy metals in it if you're really concerned.
And so any of the protein powders on either of those sites would be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Would have like your lowest risk of contamination with those things. Yeah.
But no one's checking these things for, like you said, like chocolate or any of these other things that could be contaminated, right?
Right. Right. I mean, there was that one thing that came out, or, baby food recently was under the wire, which that makes a little more sense, right? Feeding a 10-pound human something versus a 210-pound human, a little bit of a different risk there. But yeah, I mean, this isn't anything new that we're talking about. I think it's just specific to protein powder, which we talk about a lot on here. We know a lot of runners use. So I just think it's important to be informed about what this means. And then you can kind of decide, is the product you're using okay? I was actually very shocked the number of protein powders that I look at as reputable that didn't have any certification. And I was like, interesting. Yeah.
Well, I'm always really wary now of like if you like search on Amazon for protein powders and they're very inexpensive compared to the other ones. That's like a huge red flag. I'm like, there's probably nothing actually in there.
Well, see, and that's a good point. Yeah, go ahead, T.
That worries me though, because I fall into that bias as well. And then you're like, well, am I just paying more for the same crap? Like,
I think that's why these certifications are so important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because there was something that came out, it was before we started doing this, so maybe even 10 years ago, that they were doing what's called amino acid spiking to protein powders. Like, it's not cheap to make a quality protein powder, but what they were doing is, like, if you just did like a very low level test on a product, if you threw in a bunch of really cheap amino acids, it would look like it had enough protein. But when you really looked at it, it wasn't the complete profile that we need in protein powder. So people were paying for things that were like trash, right? It would say 30 grams of protein and there was like maybe quote unquote 20 grams in there. So that was a big thing like 10 years ago. So that amino acid spiking, like obviously the two certifications that we talked about would check for that. So yes, some of these brands are a little more expensive, but I think you guys are, all the questions I got about this over the last week is testament to, like, we care about that kind of stuff. So if you're going to ingest these things, like, let's make sure that it's a good, high quality product without things in it that we don't need in there.
Well, that's the thing. You go to like a BJ's or a warehouse club, whatever it would be, Costco or whatever, and you see that they have collagen, and you're like, is this the same quality collagen I would get in the other thing? And then I'm like, well, collagen is really just ground up like tendons, right, or something. What is it?
Tendons.
It's well, I mean, it's more rawhide. Which I hate to say that because that sounds disgusting. My dog eats rawhide. But yeah,
How's their joints?
Yeah, I mean, she seems agile.
Right. Loves that stuff. Getting the collagen in.
Yeah.
This is again though one of those. I mean, I don't know if I would call it clickbait, but kind of clickbait, where it's like this very scary headline that you have to actually take a step back and look at where the research came from and who did it and what it actually says. And
100%.
so
stuff like this makes me hate people, though. It really does. Because then you go online and your Instagram is filled with people sounding alarms, and you're like, "What?"
Oh yeah, I've already seen my Instagram feed with things related to this, and it's like scary. Like, watch out.
Yeah.
You're eating magnets.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Have you guys seen that one where they're crushing up cereal and using a magnet and showing you that there's metal in your cereal? Oh, it's iron. It's iron fortified cereal. We talk about the importance of getting enough iron as runners. Like, it's fine.
Wait, they're saying there's magic in the cereals?
Well, like metal. Like when you put like a magnet over like crushed up cereal, they're seeing it's just some of the iron.
So wait a second. If I take my iron supplement that I take, and I crush that up, do you think some of it would stick to a magnet?
I don't know. You better try. I never have. I'm just ingesting it instead of wasting it.
I just don't want my credit cards to get zeroed out, with the magnet stuff going on. My iron's too high.
Okay, let's move on to our next topic here. The first thing we have is some listener feedback from Michael and Valerie. They said, my friend Valerie and I ran the Disney Marathon this past weekend, and I wanted to share our win from a fueling standpoint as a result of listening to the show. We are both very much type A runners and are usually meticulous about our carb loading. Rather than agonize over carb charts and Excel sheets this time, we used our intuition and were able to properly hydrate and fuel even while spending some time in the parks leading up to the race. It was nice not doing calculations to see how many more carbs or how much more sodium we needed before the race, but this was because of listening to all the information and guidance you provide on a regular basis. We listened to our bodies before and during the race, and it was the first time either of us felt like running a marathon was easy.
Whoa.
And a bonus non-nutrition win is that we channeled our inner Team Meg and ran at party pace, pumped up the crowd, stopped for as many character photos as we wanted, and even rode a roller coaster around mile 18.
That might have had something to do with it.
Thanks again, and have a for the great content. A roller coaster.
When they said marathoning is easy, if you're stopping, taking pictures, and riding a roller coaster, maybe it's not as difficult as going all
It was
out.
nutrition. It was all nutrition. It wasn't anything else.
When he said type A runner, I was like, oh, because I saw some people running Disney and they stopped and did the roller coaster and all that stuff.
Yeah. I didn't know that was a thing.
I'm like, well, if they're type A, they probably skipped all that.
No.
Yeah, they're type D.
I mean,
Disney.
This needs to be our next goal. I don't know.
Yeah, I love it.
Race. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing, Michael and Valerie. That sounds pretty epic.
Yeah. Sounds like you guys had fun. And I think too, like the biggest takeaway from this is there's a million different ways to be successful with our nutrition. Some people like the very type A, writing things down, tracking things, and some people don't. So the message there is do what works for you. And as you can see, these two folks did it both ways and it worked great for them, and they preferred the less intense way. So, just find what works for you.
Pretend you're in kindergarten and we're going to go around the room. You're on your little piece of carpet. Megan Feathers.
Yes.
Are you type A or type B?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I would say I'm a laid back type A, though. Like, I'm not like crazy type A, but yeah, I definitely am.
That's what a type A person would say. I'm not one of those crazy.
I'm not crazy like the rest of them. No.
I'm not one of those guys. But yeah, I'm very into it. What about, I'm going to call on the other Meg now.
Definitely type A.
Right.
But again, I don't think I'm one of the crazy ones either.
I'm going to give you guys a little info. You guys are the crazy ones.
You guys are nuts. You're allowed to say that.
I would say about nutrition. I am not type A. I would say that I am type whatever Megan's doing. I'll just do that. So I kind of like watch you guys, and if you guys are eating a bagel, I'll eat a bagel.
Yeah.
But like I know that like I need to have a little more than you guys, but I'm more in that fuzzy realm of, okay, I know this is the time to eat more carbs and not worry about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I'm type A on other stuff.
Yeah. I think we all are. I think all runners are. I've never.
Yeah.
But I'm the crazy kind.
Yeah. We're all a little crazy in our own way. Don't let us think don't let anybody think we're not all a little loony.
For sure. Okay, let's answer this question from Matt. He said, I saw Feathers posted results from a study on gels to see if their nutrition facts on the packet were accurate. Are there similar studies for electrolyte powders like Scratch, Tailwind, Gatorade, etc.? What about protein powders? Would be good information to have.
I saw somebody, I don't know if they reposted it because of you, but I saw somebody else just did a post on the gel study. Yeah. And I was like, that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, here's the thing. We shouldn't be having to test all of these products to make sure they're valid. We should be able to just trust in the integrity of these brands that are labeled with a nutrition facts panel, because as we mentioned last time when we were talking about the gels, the nutrition facts panel is regulated by the FDA, and it can be within 20% of what's stated on the label is considered okay, right? We can argue whether we think that's all right or not, but that's the law. That's the rule. So I wish that we could all just be like, yeah, all these products are legit. But as we mentioned last time, some of them are not. So now we have people being very skeptical about the different products. So to my knowledge, there is not a study that looks at electrolyte powders, Matt. So are some of them a little less sodium than they say? Are the carbs a little different? It's possible, right? But nothing has jumped out at me as being like really far off and questioning these types of things, right?
We're
and like
also
I said,
talking, electrolytes aren't an expensive,
right? Good point.
In themselves. And I believe that a lot of, if you're buying from like Scratch, like I look at that as a brand of what they've done from the beginning, and they've been for themselves trying to increase performance. And they haven't been a company that's like, we are just trying to make as much money as possible. From the outside, maybe they are, but they seem like genuinely athletes, fan of the sports, trying to make things better. So between them and maybe somebody who's like Coca-Cola that's trying to turn a profit on on an electrolyte drink, those ones I do think we have to take a closer look at. Like even the Prime one that came out from the guy that fought Tyson. Like that one basically has nothing in it. It's just basically sugar water. But you do need to take a look at that.
Those are things that are on the label though.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But,
and I think, like I'm looking at the protein powder from Runway right here, and there's very loud and clear supplement facts instead of nutrition facts, right? So if something says supplement facts, that's where we want to make sure it has NSF certification, informed sport certification, to make sure that it's going through those steps we just talked about to make sure that it's a legit product. When something has a nutrition facts label, that is going through, like I said, the FDA, and that's what Scratch, I'm looking at Scratch up here. It has a nutrition facts panel. So I wish that we could just trust and be like, yeah, this is legit. And like you're saying, when it is a brand that we trust, like somebody like Scratch, it makes sense. Who should we be skeptical of? I think that's kind of what we've, been talking about all along here. If it feels too good to be true, it might be. But, I think we should be able to trust that most of these products, with that nutrition facts are legit.
Okay, so moral of the story from Matt is that we're fairly confident that most of the things we're consuming follow the FDA guidelines. And if it's a supplement, then make sure it falls under the NSF or informed sport certification.
And also the same thing we say with everything is when you try it and you're using it and maybe you get a sample or something like that, if it doesn't feel like it's doing anything, it's probably not. So if you're out on your run and you're feeling dehydrated after taking an electrolyte drink, or you're feeling muscle cramping or other things, it may be time. And it may just be that formulation. Maybe you just need to try something else. So you really do have to trust yourself.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Our next question is from Chris Lombardi. He said, my apologies if you've covered this previously, but what does the research say about endurance sports and elevated A1C? Mine, 47-year-old male, has been steadily creeping up over the last few years. In September, it was 5.9. My partner is a nurse and is convinced I'm on a diabetes doorstep. But I can't say I've heard anything about diabetes affecting the endurance.
Did you say diabetes?
Diabetes
Diabetes.
affecting the endurance/running community. So my current theories are: 1, the athletes who get exercise-induced diabetes, a term I'm pretty certain I just made up, stop training and are never heard from again. Therefore, there's no need to have articles about them. 2, endurance athletes should have a higher range than the general population and don't get diabetes, so my partner should kindly chill. 3, something else because I don't know science. Is this unique to me? If I were to stop running 50 plus miles a week and running 1 to 2 marathons a year / ingesting an obscene amount of carbs, both solid and liquid, would my A1C follow suit?
Yeah.
He said, it's amusing to me that the recommendation for high A1C is to be more active.
Right. Run more than 50 miles a week there, Chris. No,
I mean, that's the same thing. I get my inside tracker thing, and it's like your cholesterol's high, and it's like you need to exercise more. I'm like, can't.
Right. Right. I know. So taking a step back away from the endurance population, just get us all on the same page. So hemoglobin A1C is a 3-month look back of the average of what your blood sugar has been doing. So our hemoglobin, a little bit of sugar kind of attaches to that for a certain period of time. So when we're drawing that hemoglobin A1C, we can take a look and see there's, calculations of if it's your A1C is 5 point whatever, that translates to an average blood sugar of, so it's looking at kind of risk of developing type 2 diabetes. It's also looking at what your blood sugar has been up to for the past 3 months, because normally when we go to the doctor, they test a comprehensive metabolic panel, which has like an instantaneous blood sugar on it, but we know how fast that can change, right? So this is looking a little more holistically or deeper, if you will, into what's been going on with our blood sugar. So when we look at the general population, we have different criteria for what is healthy, what's quote unquote pre-diabetes. We need to be worried, right? And then where do you actually fall into the diabetes category with that hemoglobin A1C? So his partner, who's a nurse, is looking at this and probably like, holy crap, he's pre-diabetic with this number, right? Because we have very clinical guidelines as far as like where that hemoglobin A1C falls based on, what that average blood sugar is doing. So that's kind of the background on this number. Like Thomas said, if you do something like Inside Tracker, it has it on there. So a lot of the people that I work with, or probably people listening, have probably had a hemoglobin A1C drawn, even if they're pretty young. If you haven't and you're curious, ask your primary care provider. It should be covered on a yearly basis. It's just part of your wellness labs if you're curious. And then kind of taking it into more of like running specific, sports specific, there actually is some research, Chris, on the fact that runners do actually have a higher hemoglobin A1C than non-runners do. So this particular study looked at elite athletes versus sedentary folks. And what it found was the elite athletes did have significantly higher hemoglobin A1C. So why?
Are you calling him elite?
Chris, I think he is elite. I don't know. The research said that.
So should he take his index finger and gently put it over the nurse's lips and go, shh,
quiet? So we'll talk about that too. But so why might runners have a higher hemoglobin A1C, and is that a problem? I could think is probably the next thing. So when we're exercising at a higher intensity, we know that our blood sugar increases. When we have that higher blood sugar, we actually have better performance in something like a marathon race or a long run workout or a midweek workout, because we have more sugar available to go to our muscles, which we know our muscles can work faster if we have carbohydrates available, which would be that blood sugar. So the act of fueling more, like he's saying, more gels, more chews, all that kind of stuff, that higher blood sugar is actually improving our performance. But then also the stress response of training at a high level, it's almost like that fight or flight response, right? So like if we're being chased by a bear, our blood sugar is going to increase. as part of that, adrenaline surge, because our body's like, oh no, we're going to have to run. We need sugar to fuel our body, right? That high intensity exercise. So that's obviously happening in the background. So then, like you said, we're throwing more carbs at this equation. So our blood sugar is a little bit higher. So there's a reason why we're seeing people's A1Cs climb just a little bit, or in his case, his is a little high on the high side, might be related to his actual training. So this is where, like, is this a problem, right? Is the next question. So I think part of it is we have to know our own family history. So if Chris has a super strong family history of type 2 diabetes, if I were him, I probably would be like, okay, what does my daily nutrition look like? Like, is this okay? Is there something I need to change? If he doesn't have a family history of that, then maybe this is just where his hangs and he's eating fine and his weight's where it needs to be. And maybe he's fine, right? So I think rather than just looking at that hemoglobin A1C number and being like, that's a problem, we need to kind of take a step back and look at family history, where his R's been in the past, how significantly has it changed, or is it just like a slow climb with performance, before we really determine if that's a good or a bad thing.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I'm trying to think about my own numbers, and I'm like, I don't know if they've
fine.
changed.
Yeah.
But so would you expect, let's say he took some downtime for maybe, let's say 3 months and wasn't running, and I guess maybe was probably eating a little bit less carbs because he didn't need as much. Would you expect that number to go back down?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because like we said, it's an average. So if a decent part of your time you're training, I mean, if you think about that, like if you're out for a 3-hour run and then our blood sugars are a little high beforehand because we've had simple carbs, which is what we're supposed to do, and then it's going to hang a little high afterwards, right? As that stress response starts to come down after a long run, 5 or 6 hours of your day on a Saturday, your blood sugar could be elevated, right? So that average, it's going to skew the average. So, I mean, it makes sense that we're seeing a little bit of change. I thought about mine too when I was thinking about his question, and mine did increase a little bit. Like I remember what it was before I started training and what it is now, and it is up, a tiny bit. But, it's fascinating. I don't know if you ask me, but I think I would just encourage him to kind of take a look at things in the background and just make sure there's no reason to be concerned here, and maybe it is just all training.
Okay, let's get in one more question here. This is from Erin. She said, on Christmas and just in time for winter grit, I had a skiing accident resulting in a torn ACL and partial tear of my MCL. No.
I know.
That's like your leg falling off.
My doctor has gotten me immediately into PT, which includes getting on the bike. I'm slowly ramping up time and intensity, but I have never spent much time on the bike before. How do you fuel easy rides on the bike, especially when you then transition into PT and strength exercises? Single gram to get started, or should I be taking in protein pre-exercise since I'm lifting, or is protein after, like for running? All I need on that side. What about fueling during the ride? Is it only needed if you are going over an hour?
Yeah, I feel you, Erin. I mean, not on the torn knee, but I'm spending way more time on the bike than I normally do as well. So I think the important thing to understand here is a lot of runners, we're going to substitute something we're allowed to do for running, right? So like she's on the bike, she's doing PT, she's doing strength training, like I'm biking, I'm swimming. Like we're going to find a way to move our body that we're allowed to during an injury. And just because we're not running doesn't mean we don't need nutrition. I think in our minds, it's like the holy grail is like, I'm running. And then we're like, I deserve this nutrition. I need to focus on my nutrition. And then we aren't running. And like, we're like, oh no, what do I do? Do I even need to do this? But I think the underlying message is we're still moving our body. It's just not running. And yes, maybe the intensity isn't quite as high in some of the things we're doing. But I mean, even Erin outlined, she's not just biking, she's then going to PT and then doing strength training. So the volume of movement in your body might not be that different than when someone was going for an easy, 5 to 8 mile run in the morning. So I think I encourage people, if we found something that worked to fuel our running, keep doing it for your cross training. I still eat grams before I hop on the bike in the morning or before I go to the gym. That's what works, and you just keep doing it. So as far as fueling the actual activity, I would treat it, like duration wise, like you would for a run. Don't worry as much about the intensity piece. Yes, that might be a little bit different, but if you're planning on being on the bike for an hour, fuel it like you would if you were out running for an hour. And then as far as the strength training piece goes, they've done a lot of research on that. And as long as we get the protein around that lift, we're okay. So, depending on when she's doing strength training, maybe she's just eaten lunch, so that protein can count for the strength training, or maybe strength training's in the morning. So then we need to make sure we're getting our protein afterwards from breakfast. So as long as you're getting adequate protein, like within an hour before or after that strength training session, it's not quite as imperative, timing wise. We just need to make sure it's there around that session.
I think that's interesting because with adding weightlifting into my routine now, I'm very conscious of like when I get back, I'll eat the protein. And I've started doing like on the nights where I do lift, before I go to bed, I'll have like, Greek yogurt or something like to get that protein right before I go to sleep. And I've been waking up feeling really good. Like, so I do think that even if I was cutting back on running, I would then focus on what's going to help. And if she's doing the PT and the workouts, is what you just said, is increasing some of that protein. She may actually need to be eating more.
It's very possible. Yeah, absolutely. And, injured runners are sad people. And so we want to be doing something to get better, something to help feel like we're adding to the situation to get better faster. So, doing her strength training, doing her PT, making sure she's getting adequate protein and fueling her, like all that's going to help with the recovery process and help, repair and also get stronger for eventual surgery. She DM'd me, so I know she eventually is having surgery on all this. But, I think it is really important. Like recently I've been scheduling quote unquote my at-home physical therapy into my day because I just wasn't doing it right. So I like find what half hour works and I literally put it on my schedule. And then I guess this makes me realize I do kind of think about this. I'm like, okay, did I have a meal close to that, or do I need some protein after that before, so that is definitely something I look at as well, just to make sure, we're doing the work. If we're lifting and doing all that physical therapy, for me, the physical therapy is strengthening the muscles that have gotten too weak. So in order to strengthen those, we need that protein to build them back up. Right. So, I think it is good to be conscious of that.
And we talked about with your injury specifically, Advil wasn't the greatest thing, or NSAIDs, because it delays the healing process. Is there things that we can ingest or eat during the time that our body's repairing that will facilitate healing faster?
I mean, there's research that collagen helps. That was like part 2 of her question. Like, how much collagen should I be taking to like heal these, tendons and ligaments? Right. So I don't know. I mean, there is some research that 20 grams a day is even better than 10. And most of the time we just say like, 10 once a day is fine. So I don't know if she really wants to throw everything at it. She could do some in the morning and then another dose of collagen before PT in the afternoon, or like try 2 doses a day. It's not going to harm anything, besides you just have to buy more.
Okay, I think that does it for today. Thank you all for listening as always. And if you have a question that we haven't answered, you can send us an email at fuelforthesoulpodcast@gmail.com and we will answer it here on the show.
Peas and carrots.
Bye.
There was such a long pause there. Tap, tap, tap it in.
I think the problem is that...
Okay, no, we're not going off on that podcast.
Meg's like...
I put it on my face. You give me something, I'll put it on my face.